Solitary confinement as a penal practice is an American invention intended as a humane alternative to corporal punishment. As early as 1787, Benjamin Franklin argued for solitary confinement in lieu of publicly degrading criminals with forced labor. Believing that deviant behavior was caused by the stresses of modern society, social reformers recommended removing criminals from all harmful associations. Dr. Henry Weinstein, a psychiatrist who has studied prisoners in solitary, says they suffered symptoms ranging from memory loss to severe anxiety to hallucinations to delusions, and under the severest cases of sensory deprivation, people go crazy.
Most of these people that are in cells 23 hours a day are going to eventually be released, and they are going to come out a lot worse than they went in.
The studies of solitary confinement increased as the use of it increased. Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay was the most well-known solitary confinement facility built in 1866. It was used to confine inmates to an island so that if they escaped, they couldn't get back to civilization. Grandson of Henry Young gives his grandfather's report.
My grandfather would tell me of a place called the Chamber. It was a dreaded place. A pit where you sat isolated in total darkness. My grandfather was put there once. He became so bored that he would throw a penny and spend hours crawling on his hands and knees searching for it, just to throw it again and start all over. I go to Alcatraz now, I see the Chamber, and I remember my grandfather.
David Blaine is known as only street magician with the uncanny ability to levitate. Approved by Houdini's granddaughter on April 5th, 1999, David Blaine buried himself alive for 1 week under 6 feet of plexiglass tank filled with 4,000 pounds of water, an attempt no other magician has tried. Apparently he lost 24 pounds. He wants to be alone. How else can you explain this guy's increasingly intense exercises in isolation? In 1999, he spent a week buried in a glass coffin. 2000, Blaine remained inside of a giant block of ice for 3 days. Last year, he stood atop an 80-foot pillar for more than a day, and now he's taking on the challenge that will have him in solitary confinement for 6 straight weeks. Elsa Morahan, wife of a jailed Cuban dissident physician, stands in front of a replica of a solitary confinement cell her husband was placed in. In this photo taken in 2004, the replica had been built based on the details her husband sent from jail to show the conditions political prisoners are held under. The Cuban government denies having any political prisoners till this day. Today, solitary confinement exists in the Western world prisons as a special short-term punishment used against inmates, and sometimes as a voluntary option. Is it possible, though, that there are other forms of solitary confinement? Author Constance Lehman used her experience of paralysis as a way of explaining solitary confinement in her book. Having fallen off a cliff 3 weeks after a high school graduation, disability alone made life a secluded place to live. How do we stop crime from roaming the streets? How do we keep people from having an uprising, from riots forming? How do we help enforce our law? How do we help the police? How do we prevent from an uprising? Do we keep a controlled identity system? Do we track every criminal? Do we hold them back? We don't know at this point. Is there an alternative? Is there a hope? This has been the psychology of confinement.